In this video, I'll explore the connections I see between power, corruption, scarcity, and competence. And I'd like to suggest that they are interconnected, that they form a circle. And we begin with competence. So every human being in the history of humanity has had the same core basic needs: to survive, feel secure in that survival, experience love and belonging, develop self-esteem, which means to have ideals, principles, paths to move towards those ideals, and then to live up to those principles. Right? We're all seeking beauty, truth, and goodness in a variety of permutations because it feels good. A beautiful world feels better than an ugly world. A true world feels better than a false world. A world of deceptions, lies, betrayals. It feels better. We all want to feel sustainably better. We all want to avoid feeling chronically worse. A good world, a world that feels right. And of course, they're one and the same. Beauty, truth, goodness. That beauty and truth feel right. Ugliness, asymmetry, etc. feels bad. Beauty, truth, and goodness in its many permutations we all seek, and we all have our ideal version of that. And our ideal version will have a slightly different slant than everyone else because we're starting in an asymmetrical location from a different angle than everyone else. That's what perspective means. There's one picture, and there's many angles from which to view that picture. You can view it from multidimensional angles, 360 degrees, visually, auditorily, etc., etc. And so our version of beauty, truth, and goodness, what takes us back to symmetry, begins with our asymmetry, right? If we've never had a chance to become educated, our ideal may be to, a world of higher education, right? Because we understand the consequence of its lack. And there's a scarcity for us. And so we emphasize that aspect of the ideal. Now, someone else who has had two sociopathic parents, both with multiple degrees, who's been pushed into higher and higher in multiple different degrees and realizes this is not life, may have a contrasting ideal that they emphasize, to go and explore the world. Because that's what brings symmetry. That's what brings well-being for them. And so perspective on beauty, truth, and goodness, what is emphasized, will be what is out of balance and what is scarce for each person, so we're starting from a different point of view. And so that's where there will be a conflict if we confuse our ideal, our path to symmetry and our path to grace with everyone else's, right? So that's the child and adolescent confusion of self-centeredness, right? Because the world is a very big place, but a child is appropriately self-centered. The child thinks it's all about them. And the adolescent also thinks it's all about them, right? It's only an adult that realizes that it's far more interesting to explore the other, to love the other. And so an adult will embrace the complexity of the world, but a child and adolescent, having formed a true and good personal ideal, will seek certainty, will seek to avoid the fear of the unknown, fear of complexity, by imposing that on everyone else. And so it's, we're looking at the level of maturity of an individual, of a family, of a culture. A mature culture will appreciate the diversity of the culture and how each culture in history is pursuing beauty, truth, and goodness in a different way by approaching it from a different angle, a different perspective. But it's built in, it's biological to seek beauty, to seek truth, to seek goodness because it feels good. It feels better to seek beauty, truth, and goodness than to seek ugliness, etc., etc. Now, there are beliefs that shatter that simplicity. Meaning envy, for example, is a belief that it is impossible, that I will never experience what you have that I want. And since I will not experience it and I want it, and since you having it brings up frustration and pain for me, I don't want you to have it. Because I don't know how to get it, right? I don't know how to feel the way you feel. I don't know how to have what you have, so I don't want you to have it. Because you having it in conjunction with the belief that I will never have it feels awful, feels horrible. So I feel better that you don't have it either, because now I'm not alone. Now I'm not wondering what's wrong with me. You're no better than me, right? So in that framework, then beauty, truth, and goodness in other people are to be destroyed in order to feel better. But that's within the framework of a belief and within a reality set where you have haves and have-nots and no means to bridge the gap. But that also brings us into the terrain of competence, right? Because a competent group of people does not set up a system where some can have and some can never have, and thus breed envy. I mean, if you set up a system where everyone's cooperating to make sure that some have and some will never have, then the belief for many that they will never have is a reasonable belief. And if that belief leads to envy, and if envy leads to destroying what people have who do have it, it's a lose-lose scenario. So we're looking at low competence, right? A competent cult, a competent culture sets up a system where anyone who wants it has a path to it. And that everyone knows that. And that if people are struggling and can't get a path to it, that people take an interest in that, right? I hear what you're saying, but I've been at this for 20 years and I'm not getting any closer. So what is the path to it, right? And so when that's a group effort, when that's of interest to the group, well, you have a higher state of competency, right? Empathy is a higher state of competency than reptilian behavior, sociopathic behavior, right? That's why the empathic brain is a later stage brain. The reptilian brain is the first brain. It's functional, but it is not as advanced as the empathic brain. So what does it take to use the advanced brain rather than the ancient brain? Well, it takes competency, right? If you've got the latest Tesla that's fresh off the factory, and you've got a Model T Ford, a competent person chooses the superior technology, right? Empathy is a superior technology, but it requires more competency to use it and to pick it, right? So we have this dynamic. And just to finish the needs, every human being needs to discover their gifts, needs to develop those gifts and bring them into the world, creating abundance, an abundance of value, an abundance of resources for self and others. Every human being needs that and needs to become part of something bigger than themselves. The final need of every human being is to transcend the myopia of the ego identity and participate in life, in something bigger. That's what we all need. We all need it. And when our needs are fulfilled, when we fulfill our needs, we are happy. We feel better. That's what we want. Now, here's the other thing. The multiverse, the universe, the planet, the galaxy has an abundance of energy. There is more energy than we can possibly use in 1 trillion lifetimes. There is a superabundance of energy. All energy is transmutable, is transformable. It's the nature of life for one form of energy to become another form of energy in a relay, in a relationship, in an ecology of life. So there's all this energy, and energy can be transformed and transmuted into an infinite number of shapes, of forms. And we have needs. In other words, we have a desire, a need for energy to come in and be transformed in a particular way. And so what we're looking at is tremendous amount of energy out there, but a scarcity of meeting our needs. So there's all this sunlight, there's all this radiation, there's all this plant growth, there's all this land, there's all these minerals, all this water, there's all these animals. There is just an abundance of energy. And we all have the same needs. We've always had the same needs. Well, if you don't know how to help another human being meet their needs, and they don't know how to help meet your needs, then you have a disconnect, right? There's energy here that could be transformed into meeting your needs, but nobody is able or willing to do it. And so the need isn't met, or it's barely met. So what we're talking about is competency. There is a superabundance of energy, but there is a finite amount of competency to turn that energy into a superabundant resource to meet our needs. We're talking about competency. A 100% competent individual can meet the needs for themselves and everyone else if they want to, because the energy is there and they are 100% competent. Now, a somewhat competent person can meet all of their own needs for survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing their gifts, bringing them into the world, becoming a part of something bigger. A competent individual can meet their own needs. An incompetent individual can be surrounded by an infinite amount of energy and cannot meet their own needs and cannot find somebody who can meet their needs for them, and so their needs are unmet, right? There are other people who are competent, and a somewhat competent individual might be able to find such a person to meet their needs and then meet some of those needs. And a really competent person could turn that energy into meeting their needs themselves. And a completely incompetent person doesn't know how to eat, even if there's a buffet of food. Doesn't know how to drink, even if, like a baby, there might be, all the drinks lined up on a buffet table, but the baby doesn't know how to open a bottle. And so they lack even that competence. And so they cannot drink. A baby will die of dehydration in a room filled with liquid if they cannot open a bottle because they have so little competency to navigate in that world. Now, most of us can open those bottles, and so if somebody provided the bottles, but do we have the competence to make the money and fill a room full of liquid, right? So that we'll always have enough to drink, and then food and this, and so all of these different things. We're talking about a bell curve of competency, right? It's an infinite continuum. Can always be more competent at something. And so incompetency is the primary basis for scarcity. Now, the more people who are incompetent around you, the more scarcity there will be. Right? If you live in a family where everyone knows how to be a millionaire, everyone knows how to stay fit and healthy, and everyone knows how to eat and cook and eat well, and you belong in that family, you're probably not going to starve. But if you live in a family where nobody knows how to make any money, where people do know how to get arrested and avoid learning things, well, you may starve. It depends, right? So competency and scarcity are bedfellows, right? The more competency, the less scarcity. Well, I should say competence and abundance are bedfellows, but they're on a continuum. So it's an infinite continuum between incompetence and competence. Incompetence and scarcity are bedfellows. And so the more competent you are, the more abundance you have. And the more abundance you have, the less pain you have. And the less pain you have, the more empathy you have. And and even less pain and more abundance, the more transcendence you have. So there is a continuum of pain, a continuum of scarcity, a continuum of incompetence. And the more those go down, the more we move into empathy and transcendence. And in the middle, we have power. Power is the ability and willingness to act. And amongst the various forms of power, we have influence. And within the domain of influence, we have scale. We have the amount of influence and on how many people, right? So if we all give our power to a government official and they decide to embezzle the water purification system and we all drink the public water and stuff, then you have an influence. You have the ability of the official to basically poison thousands of people, right? And that ability is given to the official, right? Now, to give power to an incompetent official is incompetence, right? And so there's not really that much of a line between the incompetence of a majority of people who cannot assess competence and who give the ability to influence themselves to incompetent people, and the incompetent people, like it's not terribly competent of a water official to poison the water in order to, get a kickback, because in a country of law, then that's setting them up to be on trial for murder and embezzlement and all that. And so it's not a very intelligent person who will take that risk. It's a sociopathic person, but a sociopathic person isn't as intelligent as an empathic person. They may be a more successful manipulator, but it takes less intelligence to manipulate someone than it does to create sustainable well-being, which requires empathy, right? Sociopaths are not very happy, and they want to be, but they're not, because they're not as competent as happy people. Happy people are not sociopathic, right? Because it doesn't feel good to be a sociopath. It feels good to be competently empathic. It feels good to be trustworthy. That feels better. It feels true. It feels right. It feels good. It feels better. It feels nicer. So we're dealing with a terrain of competency here. And if you give power to incompetent people in a scarcity environment, there will be corruption and abuse of power. But I think the focus has traditionally been on the power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the idea is that there's something wrong with power, or there's something innately wrong with human beings who have power. And I would say it's not that simple. I would say that scarcity, and with it the incompetence that creates it, combined with absolute power, leads to corruption. But absolute power, when there is superabundance, is not even wanted, right? So you think of the effort it takes to control things, to get things done, to force other people. Absolute power is traditionally thought of a dictator with a big military, right? No one can supplant the dictator. The dictator can plant whatever laws, and then they have, secret police and military, and they have control of the media, and so, they do all of that, and so they've got absolute power, and they're corrupt, right? They don't, they break their own laws, they do what's good for them even when it's not good for the people, and blah blah blah, and so we call that corrupt. And usually, it kind of depends. In a democracy, when somebody has power, the promise is always to do what's good for the people, right? In a democracy, why don't you elect me and I'll do what's good for you? And so when that is corrupted to I will do what's good for me, even if it's bad for you, that's corruption. Now, military conquest doesn't say I'm going to do what's good for you. It just says I've got more guns than you. I can kill you and hurt you more efficiently than you can kill and hurt me. And so I'm taking over and I'm going to do what's good for me. Which usually does not mean making enemies of everyone, right? Because at the very least, you have to do the right thing by your secret police and your military. Otherwise, they just shoot you. They've got all the guns. They're surrounding you. They shoot you if you don't treat them well, right? And so you have to have enough competence to at least treat yourself and your secret police and your military well. Otherwise, they shoot you, right? But getting back to this point of who wants absolute power? Can you imagine how miserable it is to look at the crowd and wonder who's trying to shoot you? That's a miserable life. That's not a successful life. That's a miserable life. To look around and see miserable people who hate you, that's a miserable life. Why on earth would anyone want absolute power? And there's only one type of person who wants absolute power. And that's the person who has been systematically bullied by someone who is perceived to be powerful, and they could do nothing about it. And so their solution is, well, one day I will have that power, and then I'll be able to do something about it, right? And the helplessness moves to a sense of confidence. But it's still a relatively low state. It's not something, I mean, anyone who's paid attention to US politics and who wants to be president does not want to be happy, does not want to have enjoyment. It's a miserable job for miserable human beings who have to pretend not to be miserable. It's exhausting. It's sad. There's not a lot of power in it. 18-hour days. Why would you wish that for someone, right? It's got to be done, right? But my point is, when you have competence, you have superabundance. You have more food than you can possibly eat, more drink than you can possibly drink, more love and belonging than you could possibly know what to do with. And that's, of course, where we fall down, even in the West. We don't have more love and belonging than we could possibly know what to do with. We don't have any love and belonging. I feel tremendously unloved, tremendously insecure, tremendous amounts of self-hatred. I don't know how to love myself. I don't have love and belonging. I don't know how to love myself. And other people don't know how to love themselves, and so they don't know how to love me, right? And so that's, a crisis of competence, which leads, of course, to a crisis of confidence, because you cannot be confident in your own and others' incompetence. You are confident based on experience, right? So you have a crisis of confidence. Now, when there is scarcity of human needs for security, for love and belonging, for self-esteem, then you have a small pie with too many people wanting to eat it. You have dependency, you have scarcity, etc. When you have scarcity, and you cannot meet your own needs, let alone meet the needs for everyone else, you want to cling on to power to have significance in a world where you don't have love and belonging, but also you want to cling on to power to get more of the scarce pie, right? I want more of the pie than other people have. I want to take more, because other people aren't going to let me because they're incompetent too. They're in a scarce dynamic as well. And so if you have confidence and superabundance and competence, nobody wants the power because it's more enjoyable just to bask in all of that superabundance. Why do you need the power when you've already got what you want? The beauty, the truth, the goodness in abundance. I've got to control this. Why? You've already got what you want. Now the control is a hindrance, because to control something is to be controlled by it, right? If I want to make sure that you do what this and this and this, I've got to make sure you do all that, right? Because I'm attached to that idea. And now if you're doing something different, well, I've got to do something about that. Now I've got to change because I've got to control you, right? So with incompetence and with scarcity, control is viewed as an asset, and more control, more of an asset. And absolute power tends to lead to corruption, because the reason people want control and want power over is because they have fear, right? They want to be able to control this and that. because they're afraid. Right? Otherwise, who wants the power, right? You don't need it. You're not afraid. So absolute power does not corrupt absolutely. And nobody wants absolute power who is highly competent and abundant. Because you don't have love when you have absolute power. And to kill love, to get power, is a statement of incompetence. No one in their right mind does that. People choose power over love when they don't believe in love, when they don't have any, because they don't love themselves and they're not loved by other people. So power is a substitute for high competence that creates superabundance. And we'll leave it at that.